So a climate action plan, broadly speaking, is a high-level roadmap, and it includes policies, programs, and projects that are designed to reduce local sources of emissions that would hopefully meet or exceed the state's carbon reduction goals. The county has a goal to reduce our community emissions 50% by the year 2030. And to be clear, this is focused on the unincorporated county. Most climate action plans are not mandatory. They're not required plans that local jurisdictions have, but if done appropriately within CEQA guidelines, they can afford local jurisdictions the opportunity to establish what are called greenhouse gas emission thresholds. Those are standards for development projects, and if there are development projects that exceed those thresholds, then they would be required to reduce their emissions either through project design on-site or looking elsewhere off-site to offset their emissions. And so they have to demonstrate through things like on-site solar, electric vehicle charging, and bicycle infrastructure or transit infrastructure, that they're doing what they can to reduce the emissions impact of their projects. And if not, then the balance of those emissions are offset. So we kind of have two deliverables here. One is the plan itself, which is, again, like this policy, programs, and projects. And it's kind of like this big wish list or to-do list for various county departments and divisions to take on once approved. And then we have this other document, which is our thresholds document, which will be utilized on a fairly regular basis during plan reviews. So this project has been ongoing for over the past year. And in our first phase of launching the plan, we launched a project website. We held kind of 2 initial workshops. We've had a series of listening sessions. We also stood up what's called the Equity Advisory and Outreach Committee, EAOC, and we've presented before that committee. And we've done a handful of community presentations. Alongside with those activities, we also were doing some technical work, such as looking at our historical progress with emissions reductions and conducting what's called a greenhouse gas inventory. And that's kind of like a 1-year snapshot of all the community activity summed up with a common denominator of carbon emissions. Our second phase is where we're at right now in terms of developing the plan. We've had a series of stakeholder meetings and roundtables that were focused on particular sectors like agriculture, business, clean energy, and transportation. We held 2 community workshops back in early December when we had released our draft measures and actions. And on the technical side, we're now kind of moving forth with looking ahead at where in the future might our emissions profile be given demographic changes, given economic changes, given state policies and programs, and other things that might influence what our emissions might look like in the future. And now we're at the point in which we are looking at potential strategies and scenarios for reducing our emissions. How far and ambitious or how deep and broad should our policies and our programs be in order to meet our goals? In the other column here, there have been other efforts that have helped to feed and contribute to this effort. Back in 2019, Community Environmental Council held a series of climate resilience roundtables. And those were meant to be roundtables focused on 6 climate change challenges that the Central Coast faced. And the events had taken place over the period of which the shutdown had initially kicked in. And so the events had to pivot to go virtual, and they pivoted also to be more focused on health equity and resilience. But overall, those roundtables had generated hundreds of ideas from the community, from participants, and a steering committee, a select group of stakeholders, upvoted a handful of ideas, and some of those ideas are featured in our plan. Secondly, there's another community effort called the Regional Green New Deal, and it's one that's being led by the Central Coast Climate Justice Network and with support by UC Santa Barbara. And the Central Coast Climate Justice Network is a network of both environmental and social justice organizations that are based in Ventura and Santa Barbara County. And they held a series of house meetings with community members all throughout the county and asked the question, what would a Green New Deal look like in our county? And we've been able to incorporate a number of the concepts and ideas from that process into our plan as well. Oops, move on to that one. So generally what we heard across all of these efforts from the community is that early action and inclusive planning are important. There's a strong environmental contingent in our community as well known, and people really want to make sure that we're taking action early, but also that we need to be inclusive in the way that we do things. We don't want to continue excluding people who have not been a part of what would conventionally be considered the environmental movement, or people who might not normally be thought of when it comes to electric vehicles or electric households, things like that. And so equity, inclusivity, and affordability need to be addressed through this process. We need to make sure that what we're doing and how we're doing it is accessible, making sure that we're not coming up with programs and policies and projects that are out of reach for people or are increasing costs of living for people. And so meeting people where they are is really important. Targeting our messages and our incentives are important. Knowing where people's financial wherewithal or cultural comfort or even trust of the government is, and making sure that we're trying to meet people where they are as best as possible. There have been some themes that we've also heard around business involvement and how we need to encourage our businesses and our chambers to be more involved and more supportive of the work that we're doing. But we also need to make sure that we're creating a supportive environment for businesses, not only to thrive, but also to be a part of the solution. So making sure that incentives and guidance and streamlining are focuses of our works. That way we're making it easy for businesses to participate. Similarly, there are lots of opportunities for agriculture, farmers and ranchers and agricultural businesses to be involved if barriers can be removed for them. Regional transportation and mobility options are lacking, and I think that's something that most people are generally familiar with, and that's also very closely linked to the issues of housing, availability, affordability, accessibility of our housing. There's also been strong proponents on shifting away from fossil fuels, but there also remains questions around how feasible is it at the speed and scale that's necessary to meet our carbon goals. We are also, go ahead, is there a question? Okay. We're also utilizing a concept called equity guardrails. As I mentioned before, the environmental and sustainability efforts and movements have not been as inclusive as they needed to be. And we want to make sure that the process by which we're creating this plan, the process by which we're implementing the plan, and the outcomes of our plan and our work are contributing towards more equitable outcomes and are not continuing to exacerbate inequity or injustice by excluding and marginalizing or making further out of reach new technologies and things like that for community members. So these are things that we're trying to ensure, keep front of mind, use as a lens for evaluating our work and making sure that we're also focused on equity through our process. So there's a lot of information, a lot of synthesis that's taking place to try and distill what we've heard from the community and bring it together into a plan that will feature our community vision, goals and objectives, our priorities and guardrails. And now at the point at which we are looking at our draft measures and actions, the full plan will include an implementation plan and metrics for tracking our progress. We've come up with 4 priority sectors for this plan, focusing on housing, mobility, and transportation, resilient clean energy, sustainable and circular economies, and land stewardship and carbon sequestration. And just to put that into comparison, we have already in place a 2015 Energy and Climate Action Plan. It's much different in terms of its outline. There are 11 sectors in that plan. There were 53 measures and over 200 actions. It was very voluminous and very challenging to implement and track. So we're hoping that we'll be able to be more focused and nimble in our new climate action plan. So our draft measures and actions are now available on a tool called Consider It. And we're inviting you all to, oops, okay, we're inviting you all to participate by logging in. And if we have time and people are interested, we can start walking through this process. I find that helpful for people to kind of have a little study session. So I do encourage you to click on the link right now as I'm talking. So you can sign up. It's pretty easy. Just need an email, password, and name. You can use an alias. You can use initials. You can just use your first name. If you don't want to provide your full name, that's totally fine. But once you create your account, you can start participating on the website. We have a Spanish version available as well. And we're actually going to start working with our County Promotoras network to try and engage our Spanish speaking community more frequently to help them engage on this platform as well. So I'm going to give a brief tutorial on how to use this or just orient you to what you're looking at. And we can also do a little screenshot of the website as well. So you're going to see all of the measures and actions. Each measure is kind of the bolded part, and then they have a drop-down list, and you can sort those drop-down lists by different factors. And you'll see already there's a number of people who've contributed their opinion to each of the action items, either support or opposition for certain action items. And you simply, once you're logged in, you'll see this blue arrow appear under the spectrum, and then you can drag your own arrow left or right to provide your support or opposition to any of these measures. You can also help qualify your position by adding what's called a consideration. And here's the link right there. And you can see there'll be a count of either pros or cons kind of considerations. And it helps to start a dialogue with the community. It helps to provide nuance that we normally won't see or hear once we get to things like the Planning Commission or the board and presenting this full plan. So having comments, suggestions, changes are always helpful to read through. And then finally, if there are ideas that we haven't listed here, we welcome the community to actually add new action items. And then the community, the rest of the user group can actually vote on those action items that you've proposed. So there's already a number of items that the community has contributed. I've just recently seen one that doesn't seem to be all that serious, but it's still there nonetheless. And so it's meant to be this tool really to help generate community ideas as well. So we opened this tool back in early December. We originally had a date for February 1st to close it out, but I think we'll push it out to February 15th, just to allow more time and more people to participate. And if people are interested and willing, we can walk through the different sections and we can talk about the different measures and actions, but we can also, and I'll make sure that we can reserve time for questions as well. Does that sound good?
You got it.
Okay. So let me provide a different screenshot now. Does anybody have any general questions about what I've said so far?
It looks like Alan asked, are you shown where the opinion is currently before you vote?
Yes, if I'm understanding correctly. So here we are at the website. Here's a link for the Spanish language one, and here's a little bit of introductory text. We do have a project website that I already mentioned, and here it's at countyofsb.org/OneClimate. And this is where you can always find information about the project, because the Consider It website will not always be the place to come to learn more about the plan. We have tabs here for the 4 different sectors that I mentioned, the focus areas. So right now we're looking at all, but we can sort accordingly to different focus areas, and then it will repopulate those lists. So I'm logged in as a user right now, and I have here my blue arrow showing up, and here I can drag it left and right. And you can see here that the opinion's already skewed pretty high over in favor of this action item. And there are 7 pros and cons listed here. And if we go into add a consideration, this is another place where you can add your opinion. It's just a dedicated web page for this one action item. And you can drag your opinion here, and then you can add in your commentary. Again, here it can be your commentary, it can be a suggestion, but here it offers again this dialogue of different opinions. You can return back to the results here. Oh, and we'll go back to homepage.
Hello, Garrett. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
I have a question about using this. I was looking at it a couple days ago and trying to fill out my survey. And when it came to looking at, I clicked on Consider It and went to, so I could see these kinds of things on it that people had commented. And I wondered if there was a way to like say, yes, this is a great idea. And so I thought that if I pulled it over into, I can't remember what I did, pulled it over into something, the other side.
Mm-hmm.
If it wouldn't work. Oh, here, if I add a consideration, and then I wanted to second what someone had said because it was what I would have said, just to add an emphasis to it. And so I thought I dragged it over into the comment section.
Excuse me, Susan, you know, this is a little bit,
Too detailed.
yeah. So why don't we
Sorry.
save those kind of questions or just put them in chat and we'll be able to, maybe there'll be time for him to deal with that. But, and I think he probably, you heard Kevin, the drift of what she's trying to say. So maybe you've got an answer to that. But please, let's not be too specific in our questions so we can get a general, this presentation, get through it in the time that we have. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I'm happy to troubleshoot with anyone afterwards. I'll leave my information before the end of the meeting. I'm happy to do that offline with anybody else. So I think what we can do, if people are willing, we can go through, we can kind of walk through these different measures and actions. And I would welcome any comments or questions on some of these, because I know some of these actions, the way that they're worded, can be somewhat technical or inaccessible. So I want to make sure that people understand what we mean by them, or have any clarifying questions. So I'd like to start actually from the bottom, because that's originally how we had intended for this list to appear, but it kind of sorted first to last by going bottom up. So in housing, transportation, and mobility as our first focus area, we want to focus on trying to reduce the need for commuting by encouraging work at home, walk to work, and locating jobs near transit. So really making sure that we're keeping people home or as close to where they need to go as much as possible. And that's really through community design and smart planning. And the actions that we have here are things like incentivizing our own county employees to carpool, or increasing the cost of parking for our county employees. Things like continuing Zoom for public meetings. This was actually a community contributed idea and has a lot of support already. We do need to, we have here requiring large employers, including the county, to meet vehicle trip and emission reduction goals or pay non-compliance fees. So this is more of a stick measure. And then supporting things like public-private partnerships to increase internet access and speed and support, especially in rural portions of the county. We need to, the second measure is increasing reliability and accessibility of transit services. So partnering with transit providers to increase service, making sure it's more reliable, including things like commuter rail, expanding park and ride availability throughout the county. We also want to make sure that other modes of transportation, like bike share, like scooter share, or even car share, are available, and helping to connect our regions, particularly our cities, who are now taking on these kinds of programs. We want to help to prioritize infrastructure for transit, for things like rapid bus services, so that way we're able to afford as much space as possible to our transit vehicles, so that way they're able to improve reliability and improve speed of service. Here's that example that I was kind of referencing. Here's kind of a facetious contribution. It seems like constructing a rail line between San Ynez, Solvang, and Santa Barbara through the San Marcos Pass and running a coal-fired steam locomotive. And obviously there's a lot of people who don't support that one. The next measure is increasing affordable housing and reducing the number of commuter car trips. And so the county's working on a housing element, and that will look at increasing, making sure that we're appropriately zoned in our communities to accept the number of new housing requirements that have been placed on us by the regional planning agencies and the state. We also want to explore different types of strategies to creating and preserving affordable housing. And the kind of housing that does get created, we need to make sure is more transit oriented, and really trying to encourage people to walk and bike and do things outside of driving their vehicle by themselves. The next measure area is enhancing our transportation policy and infrastructure planning. A lot of this is focused on safe routes and safety, making sure that we're prioritizing safety when it comes to all users of the road, such as pedestrians and bicyclists. We need to improve the way that we monitor and track information around how people move around the community, because right now it's somewhat antiquated and very time-based, and it's not as advanced as it needs to be in order to improve on our policy and program infrastructure. There are some things here, like this action item says leader support and establishment of an exchange bank for transportation infrastructure and programs, catalog and match VMT reducing projects with VMT generating projects. So the idea here is that there are a lot of infrastructure projects and programs that don't get funded either by local governments or by transit agencies. And then there are projects that are coming into the county and to the cities that need to reduce VMT or vehicle miles traveled that they're responsible for. And so, they may not be able to do that on site as much as possible, but they can also invest in a catalog of sorts of new infrastructure and programs that would otherwise go unfunded. So that's the concept there, kind of a challenging one. Then our last measure is here increasing the use of zero emission vehicles, looking at our county fleet, looking at our county facilities, and where we offer things like electric vehicle charging, increasing van pool options, particularly electric van pool, trying to work in partnership with agencies and businesses so that way we can increase utilization of medium and heavy duty vehicles, particularly in commercial fleets, promoting programs and incentives for smaller types of vehicles like scooters, bikes, and particularly ones that are replacing vehicles. And then there are measures here also to increase requirements for charging infrastructure for buildings. And these are ones that I believe have been contributed by the community. See, I'll pause here at this section. It says, okay, so there's a question, where do building codes and standards that allow for climate resilience and in the face of climate disasters? Okay, so this is a question from Vijay, and the question is, where would we have building codes and standards that allow for resilience in the face of climate disasters? So that's a good question. So some of that is covered here in the section under resilient clean energy, where we talk about energy resilience in buildings, where we want to increase the utilization of things like solar and storage, and reducing heat island effect, enhancing wildfire resilience. There's also, you all should know that there's also another project that will be starting that the county will lead on, primarily focused on climate change adaptation. And that will cover a lot of the adaptation needs that our communities have. So this climate action plan, just so people are clear, is primarily focused on what we call mitigation, or mitigating climate change as much as possible, mitigating greenhouse gas emissions as much as possible. Adaptation is kind of somewhat a different field, but we're trying to work as close as possible between our two projects. So we're now in the section under resilient clean energy. And I apologize, I hadn't mentioned this before, but I'm trying to sort by trending, or we can sort by earliest first, because that's the order in which we've entered them in, and sometimes this is the order by which people, yeah, the order in which we've entered them, and then we'll see at the bottom the order additional community additions as well. So in this section, we have 4 measures, and we can start off here at the top with increasing energy resilience in new and existing buildings. So this one looks like a pretty divisive one. We have, you know, a fair amount of balance on both sides of the issue, but banning natural gas infrastructure for new development, major remodels, including municipal projects. So this is understanding that, you know, now where most of our communities are being served by Central Coast Community Energy, which puts the county on the path to 100% renewable energy by 2030. That still leaves natural gas consumption in buildings as being the largest source of emissions in buildings. And while we do recognize that the natural gas system may become more cleaner as more renewable sources of natural gas come online through things like digesters and anaerobic systems like at our landfills or at dairy producers or wastewater treatment plants, there still remains a large portion of natural gas that is still fossil fuel based, and we need to essentially avoid as much of that consumption as much as possible. And any new infrastructure that we put down on the ground will ultimately need to get replaced or retrofitted in some way if we're going to move away from fossil fuels. So, you know, doing so for new construction is a relatively easy feat compared to doing so for existing buildings. And that's something that we need to look at developing programs and services for, as well as requirements. So we have here develop and adopt an ordinance for existing large buildings and facilities to reduce their energy use over time. We have here a energy assurance and assessment services program. This is a program that the county is leading on and will be providing to large institutions to help reduce their energy use. As we move further down into this list, we're getting more into the resilience aspect of our energy system. So things like increasing utility scale solar opportunities to allow for solar development on ag lands, creating resilience hubs and neighborhoods that are backed up with resilient energy systems, reducing heat island effect and energy consumption through things like cool paving, cool roofs, and tree planting.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah, what is the energy assurance plan that was at the top of the screen just a moment ago? Scroll up just a little bit.
Yeah, sorry, I glossed over that.
It sounds like something very specific, but nobody really seems to know what it is.
Correct, yes. So back in 2019, the county put out what's called a strategic energy plan, and that plan was focused on ways in which we could increase renewable energy throughout the county. And that's why we also have this utility scale solar ordinance measure up, because that's an action item that is also moving forward through our planning and development department. But the energy assurance plan was specifically referenced in the strategic energy plan. And energy assurance, what we mean by that is making sure that we're able to keep basic critical loads, energy loads operational as much as possible, particularly during times of extreme heat or high winds, wildfire conditions. I'm sure some of you have experienced public safety power shutoffs or outages as a result of some of those conditions. And so an energy assurance plan would help us to identify critical facilities throughout our community, whether they're publicly or privately owned, and then come up with ways to increase their energy resilience, either through on-site systems like solar and battery storage, or maybe it's further upstream infrastructure improvements that need to be made to making sure that transmission and distribution lines are better protected.
Okay. I guess what I'm wondering is it based on renewables, or could it be, I mean, I want to oppose if it has diesel generators in a large scale. It doesn't really say what kind of energy is, you know, what resources are being used to achieve that goal.
Yeah, thank you for that, and that is an important point to put out there. From the county's perspective and from the sustainability division perspective, you know, we are definitely wanting to make sure that we're doing as much fossil fuel free energy systems as much as possible. Diesel backup generators will, from our perspective, should be the options of last resort. So the reason why diesel backup generators get put in, you know, get utilized as much as they do is that it really isn't any planning when it comes to energy assurance. It's the power system goes down, people need energy today and tomorrow, and so they go and get a diesel backup generator, and it's quick to deploy. And so we need to have the forethought to really look at the weaknesses in our infrastructure and find ways of bolstering them with as much renewable and resilient energy systems as possible. So thank you, Brett. Let's see, I'm going to try and get through the rest of these as quickly as possible, but I apologize. So we have some things here that are kind of more on the promote and advocate scale, which are not going to necessarily yield in emission reductions, but are important to put out there. We want to make sure that we're advocating and promoting things like building electrification, that we're promoting incentives and resources that are already available that, from other institutions, other agencies, and we're advocating for programs that are making sure that programs are accessible for our community members. Moving down into increasing sustainability and resilience of county operated facilities. So this is only looking at the buildings and facilities that we operate as the county. We want to make sure that we're doing similar things with our work as we're asking of the community. So pushing our facilities to be as all electric as possible where it makes sense, making sure that we're as water efficient as possible, increasing the use of renewable energy on all of our facilities, and doing things like joint procurement to help accelerate retrofits and reduce costs and create jobs where we can. We recognize that it will be still a balance of facilities that will likely not be able to either get electrified or maybe further out into the future. And so looking at renewable natural gas as a fuel source from our utility will be an action item we'll take on. We do have a measure here on limiting the increase of fossil fuel extraction and developing a sunset strategy. So we have here banning the expansion of new extraction and fueling infrastructure for fossil fuels. When it comes to existing oil operations, we want to consider looking at thresholds for energy and carbon intensity of those extraction methods. And then looking at how do we create programs and resources to help transition potentially former fossil fuel employees into other sectors of our economy as changes affect that industry. So what does the county consider new extraction? So anything that anyone has to come to the county for permit application, and says that we want to construct a new oil extraction well, that would be considered new extraction. If it's an existing well we would not be able to, that would still be existing. And so we would have to then be more focused on the energy use and the carbon intensity of the operations. The last measure here is increase energy and carbon efficiency of water production, treatment, conveyance, and use. So this section acknowledges the carbon in water and energy, the energy intensity of our water system, and more focuses on increasing the energy efficiency of our water system. And so I'll move on from that one. Okay, so we still have 2 sections left. I don't have to read through all of these unless people find it helpful. I do want to reserve some time for questions, which I still see coming in through the chat. But I'll go for just a few more minutes if people are still open to that. All right, so the next measure is increase community food access, equity, and resilience. So we want to make sure that we're connecting our food systems to the climate and community resilience and equity. And where we can, getting our county procurement to focus on local as much as possible, preferring regenerative and low carbon foods, that we're promoting local food cultivation and production as much as possible. We want to support our local businesses in becoming more sustainable through programs like our Green Business Program, which is already established, but continues to need enhanced services and incentives to become more robust. Reducing food waste and increasing the use of organic recycled materials is the next measure. So we want to make sure that we're avoiding food waste as much as possible, that we're capturing as much green waste as much as possible, and then we're making sure that we're reapplying that compost that gets generated from those programs as locally as possible. We have here reduce the use of non-recyclable, non-compostable, single-use items. And so that would require developing and adopting an ordinance to banning those types of serviceware. And then also partnering with local businesses to pilot and adopt reusable container systems. The next measure is reducing the energy and carbon intensity of the food system. So things like electrification grants are out there for ag operations, but also we want to encourage things like integrated pest management and other agricultural practices to help reduce the use of fossil fuel-based pesticides and other kinds of inputs. Okay, we're almost to the end, folks. This next section is relatively new, or it's much more robust than before. Carbon sequestration will be featured largely in our plan due to the fact that we'll likely not be able to reduce all the emissions to meet our goals within kind of primarily the urban boundaries. We'll need to look further throughout our community to help look at ways of drawing down carbon out of the atmosphere to help balance and meet our goals. So through natural and working lands, we need to make sure that we're trying to both preserve our natural and working lands as well as enhancing them through tree planting and habitat restoration, and making sure that we're able to measure the amount of carbon that's being pulled down from the atmosphere, and making sure that we're also reimbursing the landowners and practitioners that are doing that kind of work. There are some potential opportunities to look at ocean-based carbon sequestration or carbon capture and storage technology, which is more mechanical type of system, but we do have the viability kind of that exists in the county for us to be able to explore. And we want to look at ways in which we can help make it easier for restoration to happen when it comes to habitats and ecosystems, making sure that we're doing as much to enhance our urban and rural community forests and our public right-of-way and our facilities and parks as well. The last one here is establishing a budgeting framework for investing in county funds in local carbon sequestration projects. And this is a recognition of the fact that, as I mentioned before, we're likely not going to be able to reduce all of our emissions as we would like to. We'll have to find a way to offset our remaining balance of emissions in order to meet our goals. And that would require spending money on things like carbon offsets or different kinds of mechanisms to help pay for carbon sequestration. And so, just like a rainy day fund or budgeting, your savings for a large expenditure in the future, we need to come up with some kind of framework for planning for those expenses into the future. These last ones here are ones that have been contributed by the community, and there's already been a decent amount of public opinion on those. So one question here is, how the outcomes of the survey. So as people are participating, what we want to know whether people support or oppose certain action items is we want to know if we can confidently bring this together in a full, complete draft plan and present it to the board, and that we'll know that we'll have as much community support as possible. Where there are things, where there's opposition, where there's commentary, we'll take all these into consideration, and we'll reflect on whether we need to add new action items, whether we need to change existing language, or whether we need to rethink the way that we're approaching a certain sector or certain policy consideration. And where possible, we'd like to reach out to particular people, maybe who've contributed these comments and suggestions, or to particular stakeholder groups, and ask them to help us work through what some of the sticking points may be. Ultimately, as we prepare our plan, we will have to come up with an implementation plan, which will spell out what department and what division is responsible for which action item, what is the general time frame for implementing this action item, what might be the estimated costs of a particular action item. And so that will be done more internally. That will be done looking at the feasibility, the viability of certain actions, knowing that there will sometimes be multiple actions that are, or multiple tasks that are part of implementing any action. So that's, so we'll take into consideration where the community support is, but also we'll also be thinking about our own feasibility of implementing any of these action items. Let's see, I'm going to try and go back here through the chat a little bit to see if I can make sure I've.
Let me, Chair, just interject with a question.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us just a little about the evaluation of outcomes and where we might be able to, as citizens, to monitor those evaluations. What's the outcome side of this, and how do we measure it, and how do we know about it?
Sure. Thank you for that question. So we will come up with a set of metrics, key performance metrics that we'll be tracking likely on an annual basis. So those would be things like energy use, fossil fuel consumption, landfill waste disposed. There will also be other things that we'll track. We also have information at the state level, like vehicle registrations for different fuel types. So we'll be able to track and monitor progress in different ways. And so we hope to have sorry, let me also say something else. So we know that SBCAG is working on a dashboard, a data dashboard. It's primarily focused on monitoring indicators for one of its regional transportation plan, and that will look at. And the regional transportation plan is designed to try and reduce the amount of trips that people are taking in and out of throughout the county. So we're hoping to utilize this data dashboard as being a place where we can also have other key indicators of community sustainability that will hopefully provide more localized information change over year from one year to the next. And so that's one way in which we hope to continue to track progress. The other way is that we'll be creating progress reports. Right now we have a final report on our current energy and climate action plan. And we'll be bringing that to the board in March. So we'll be kind of sharing how we did in terms of implementation progress, the challenges that we faced, and lessons that we've learned along the way. Let's see, I'm going to try and get back further up here into the chat for some questions that I might have missed. Let's see, so what about housing upgrades, food production, and diet? I think I mostly answered that one. When it comes to personal diet, you know, that's not really an area where the county has a strong ability to influence. Obviously, education and information are important. And we'll do that where we can, but we also have other stakeholders who I think are better suited for delivering that message. So it's one area that we're not really focusing too strongly in. Is quote unquote, let's see, is advocating CEQA mitigation? Vijay, would you like to clarify that question? It seems like it was not complete. It says, is advocating CEQA mitigation? Oh, I see. Is advocating. So we do have some language in here where we're talking about advocating, and that would not amount to CEQA mitigation, as I mentioned. Would not amount to mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions. So the technical challenge that we face is that we have to somehow quantitatively demonstrate that the measures and actions that we come up with are going to, that there's some kind of quantitative analysis behind our ability to reduce carbon emissions. Some of these measures do not have a quantitative aspect to them. And so some of those things, like where we're advocating for policies or programs, will not ultimately will not have that quantitative analysis. Let's see, what legislation is Sacramento working on that addresses improvements for natural gas fueled home and business furnaces? Okay, great question. So there's a lot of going on at the state level and by the utilities. So the state of California has an energy code, and that is updated every 3 years. The energy code is getting closer and closer to requiring all electric homes, but is not quite yet there. The next electric code will be, or the next energy code will be what we call electric ready, meaning that that you'll have plugs that may be sitting behind your stove or your water heater as it's built, and that your home will have an electric panel that should be sized appropriately if any time those things were plugged in and switched out for an electric version. But people would still have the option to having a gas-fired stove and a gas-fired water heater if they still wanted to. Local jurisdictions are implementing REACH codes, and some of you may be aware that the state of Santa Barbara has a natural gas ban on new infrastructure. So as of now, new buildings with certain exceptions are constructed only as to be all electric.
When the evaluation is done by you, is it of the entire county all the institutions and activities in the county is a way to get a kind of combined indicator of where we stand on climate control, so to speak? Maybe that's a silly question, but it seems to me.
No. That's a good question. So as I mentioned, our work is primarily focused on unincorporated county. That's where we have the most influence through this document, but we do try and work as much as possible with our partner jurisdictions. And obviously, people move in and out of every community. Climate change does not respect our political boundaries. And as I mentioned, through this data dashboard that SBCAG is developing, we hope that it'll provide a much more regional perspective of where energy consumption is, where transportation performance is, and other metrics that we're able to track and measure on an annual basis. So we are hoping that there will be a more robust platform for this community-wide data to show up. But this plan in particular is primarily focused on unincorporated county carbon emissions. Let's see. Recommend that county deepen open spaces along creeks, turn them into groundwater recharge basins. This will be necessary to maintain the level of water table as more and more is pumped during global warming. All right. Thank you, Harold. Please input that into consider it if you have the available time and wherewithal to do so. But if not, you can also email me separately, and maybe we can feature that as well. Before, I know we're getting close to the hour, and I don't know how much time people have, but just before I move on, I will also just drop my email. If anyone wants to contact me directly and follow up with any other questions or comments, totally feel free to do so. And if you want another presentation, if you're part of some other organization or cohort that you would like this presentation for, please let me know. And then also, we're also connected to other people in the county and other people out of the county who can also provide information on a wide variety of sustainability related subjects if I can't answer them.
Well, we allow ourselves to go up to 1:30 if we need to. So go ahead.
Okay, I'll try and I kind of need to peel off relatively soon. I do have another meeting, but I'll try and get to a few of these towards the end.
Looks like Sarah has a question.
Hi, I was wondering, does the plan have anything for improving the infrastructure for pedestrians and bicyclists?
Yes, so we do have that, and that's here under housing, transportation, and mobility. It's somewhat of a high level, like prioritizing, implement and pedestrian bicycle projects, prioritizing safety in frontline communities. We also have in motion what's called the active transportation plan, and that is more specifically focused on specific unincorporated communities and infrastructure projects that the county can implement in order to, as you say, make biking and walking more safer, more accessible, more comfortable.
Because that's my primary mode of transportation when I financially could no longer drive, and so I'm reducing my carbon footprint by walking over to the Democratic headquarters every day from where I live. So it's maybe a 13-minute walk, but what we need to do is to make all our communities walkable and safe, and with lighting and all that.
Yeah, definitely. Let's see, so one recommendation here, bring a carbon sequestration company to Santa Barbara County and use abandoned oil wells for carbon sequestration. That is an interesting one. Please contribute it if you can. Let's see, can we support a nationwide price for carbon to incentivize all the climate goals we are working toward? A carbon pricing, a carbon tax, that could be something that's done locally as well, that would likely be a ballot measure if it's a tax. But we can also modify the county's legislative platform to say that that it supports a carbon tax. That would likely be something that the Board of Supervisors may need to approve from a policy standpoint. Let's see. It seems to me that anything that is not super green is opposed. What is the point? Gary, would you like to qualify your statement there? Gary Michaels.
Diesel or anything that's not green is opposed. I'm not quite sure I'm understanding the purpose of the survey.
I'm sorry, that was very faint. Can you try that again?
Once again, just in glossing over the survey questions that you presented in this presentation, any item that's fossil fuel related is opposed. It's pretty obvious. And anything that's not fossil fuel is greatly accepted. So I'm not sure I understand what the point of the survey is. I mean, what's there to discover here?
I mean, there are other things that are not fossil fuel related, but I get what you're saying. I think what we want to offer is really to have as open and accessible and inclusive as a process as possible for allowing community dialogue, because a lot of this, as we know, ends up at the Planning Commission, will end up at the board, and maybe that will inevitably happen anyways. But we're trying to afford people as much time to air their opinions, to air their opposition or support for something, and we may have, like I said, we may modify things based off of the where the community opinion is at or where the suggestions are at. Let's see, how can we tell which items were submitted by the county and which by someone else? Are ones submitted by the county given more weight? Yeah, so I apologize. The ones that are submitted by the county is primarily by date, and that's the only way we would be able to distinguish ones that were submitted at a later date by someone else. We don't have a way of really identifying who contributed them. Once you enter into a specific one, I think you could see here it's submitted by Yami Rivas, but Yami is a consultant to us, so you would only have to know that in order to understand that that's something by the county. Are the ones submitted by the county given more weight? I would generally say yes, because these are ideas that we came up with initially, but we will definitely consider ones that the community has contributed to and have, we're able to look at them with more in depth and analyze them. And if there's a decent amount of community support, I would say, I don't see why not, we wouldn't be able to include them. Okay, so I think if that's, I think I'll stop there. I understand that there are some questions that have not yet been answered, but what I'd like to do is I can follow up with the event kind of coordinators, and we can send out a follow-up email. I'll include our presentation and my contact information, and there'll be some questions. I believe the recording should also capture the chat history. So we can also answer the questions that way in written form and follow up. And again, I have left you my email as well. So I'll just say thank you so much, everyone, for giving me your time today and for participating in the platform. It's really helpful for us as we move forth. And again, if you have any other questions, feel free to contact me separately. But otherwise, just want to say thank you again to SBCAN, to the League of Women Voters, for allowing me the opportunity to present.
Well, thank you very much, Garrett, for all of this and for all of this labor. Let me just say a lot of the chat questions seem to be about the survey website itself. So I would kind of urge people, myself included, go there and actually figure it out how it works instead of asking those kinds of questions without first trying to figure it out yourself. That's part of what I think we have to be doing. But I appreciate very much the offer that you just made, which is that we will be able to send out to everyone who we have the information for a summary or some way of summarizing what you have said, and some avenues for them to direct questions to you as we go forward. This is just a process with enormous importance and a lot of moving parts and a lot of political dynamics behind it. And I'm so glad personally that we had a window very much into this and to the portholes or the methods by which you're trying to get public engaged in this. Vijaya, do you want to say anything?
Yes, Dick, thank you. Garrett, thank you so much. I am very impressed with that survey, the type of survey that you have over there with so much detail. I must say I haven't had time to look through the whole thing, but I look forward to it. And the way you explained it, it's a lot easier now to actually go on and put in our comments. So maybe league members will want to do the survey instead of the league sending a separate letter to you on this. So we will consider some of this, and we may do it in a group that we can get all of our ideas out there. So I hope you will find our input useful. On that.
You're suggesting a kind of little parties where people collectively can go to there and play on it. Well, that sounds like a good.
Yeah, we have a Sustainable Communities Committee, and we'd like to do it, together at one of our meetings. That way, we will have discussion and also make it more useful to you, hopefully.
And maybe we're setting a new style of social relationships. Let's all get together and talk about climate change plans and play with the website and have some wine with that. That'd be great. Okay.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's any announcements people want to share about things that they would like people to know about before we adjourn. Anything like that? I want to say we will have another roundtable in February, and we hope at least one of the focuses will be to update affordable housing issues with some of the decision makers around that kind of question. And I think, Nadia, you had another presentation we're also going to be doing in that February roundtable. You want to mention what that is?
Sure, yeah. So for the North County Roundtable, that'll be on February 10th at 5 p.m. We'll be hearing from the Solomon Hills proposal, the developers of that proposal. We talked about it a little bit a few months ago, so you might remember that. And then for the South County Roundtable, yeah, we'll hear from someone from the Planning Commission about issues there, including the housing element update and potentially also an update from the Citizens Formation Commission for the city of Santa Barbara. So that is the commission that is making an oversight committee for the police in Santa Barbara. And they've been working for, I think, a year or longer now on that. So we'll hear an update, hopefully, on that. Thanks, Dick.
Very good. Thank you, Nadia. Nadia is our full-time SBCAN staff member who works on all kinds of advocacy and events for us. And it's been tremendous to have her added to our staff. And if you haven't joined the League of Women Voters in SBCAN, now's your opportunity. Go to their websites and do it. We need everybody's active engagement, of course. All right, Happy New Year, and hopefully stay safe.
Likewise for the League of Women Voters, please join us. Yeah, we do a lot of work, not just voter services. We also work on climate change issues and criminal justice reform and a number of housing issues. So please join us.
And by the way, you all can save the chat when you leave, and you might want to, since there are a lot of links, I think, that have been put up there that would be helpful. Anything else?
Yes, Dick. Brett Garrett and I have had our hands up. Go ahead, Brett.
Sorry.
Well, sure, since you've called on me. I just posted in the chat. I think this is a statewide issue. There's a possible decision at the CPUC in a couple of weeks that's just a real disaster. And a recent survey says 95% of people who want solar would decide not to install it under this decision that they're proposing. It's major disaster. So I posted something in the chat. And the other thing, I don't know
what that's about is the PUC seems to want to take away a lot of the incentives that roof solar owners have by reducing the, what do you call it, the rebate or the refund,
the compensation. Yes.
Compensation. And it's incomprehensible how they or the governor could support such a thing.
Yeah, and it goes beyond that to actually charging a fixed charge for every kilowatt of energy you have on your roof. You have to pay.
Unbelievable.
Pay a fee every month if you have it.
Unbelievable. Harold, did you have Hal Hill?
Yes, Brett Garrett and I and about 8 other people are continuing to work on forming the Central Coast Public Bank. The city of Watsonville has decided to take the lead. They are going to be the ones to send out the request for proposals. We've turned in what we think should be in that request for proposals. And we are in the process of getting the final commitment from all 10 cities and 3 counties for their share of the money. And we will be proceeding on the sending of the request for proposals in February.
Great. Incredible. Great. I don't always see hands, so anyone else? Going once. Twice. All right. Well, wonderful to see you all. Stay safe, please.
Thank you to SBCAN.
Thank you, League of Women Voters.
Thank you, Dick.
It's a good marriage. It's a good marriage. Okay, take care.
Thank
Hi,
you,
everyone.
guys.
Thanks for coming.